Yep.
Did your daughter come back?
They're literally will be home probably in half an hour.
Even the California one?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. They all gathered in Philadelphia and they're coming
okay.
right now. So.
Well, that's great. So you'll have a house full.
And my
tomorrow?
sister's here with her kids and husband as well.
Oh, wow.
Recording in progress.
So, yeah, that's good.
How's your mom doing?
Good. She's recovered very well.
Good.
My dad's okay. He's starting to have some issue, nagging type things.
How old is he?
89.
Okay. Yeah.
But he doesn't, as you've heard the whole thing, doctors are the worst patients. My sister is been here since Sunday, is yelling at him every day. He doesn't do this, he doesn't, and I'm like, good, thank God, because I do it, he doesn't listen to me, but maybe he'll listen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are you going to do?
We'll all get there.
Yeah.
I had dinner with a 93-year-old on Sunday night who's basically losing her hearing. And it was a hard dinner.
That's what he has hearing aids, but he just doesn't want to adjust them. And it's really hard to communicate.
Yeah.
Now, believe me, it's frustrating.
Are we on yet?
Oh, we're recording.
Are we recording? Okay.
Yeah.
Better.
I just muted us.
You muted us? That was good.
Trying.
I'm glad you muted us. Thank you.
Before we start denigrating, the senior citizens who can't hear. Well, I don't see Jen on
Here
there.
she comes.
Here she comes. There's Anne Marie.
Oh, okay.
Anne Marie's at home.
It's her birthday.
Is it her birthday today?
Really?
I didn't know that.
Oh.
Okay. There's Chris.
Oh,
there's Jen.
Okay.
Now we're unmuted.
Okay.
We've got 7 members present.
Okay. Frank's not on yet, no. And Tom Panetta may or may not join us. Well, we're just like 1 minute after 4, 2 minutes after 4.
Oh, there's Frank.
Yeah, there's Frank.
Joe is here. He just doesn't have his camera turned on.
Oh,
Joe Kelly.
Joe Kelly, good. Okay,
His camera's just off.
all right. Are we still muted?
No. There he is.
Okay. Yeah, there he is. Okay. All right. So good afternoon. Hello, Jen.
Good afternoon. Hello.
And hello to everybody else on this pre-Thanksgiving Tuesday. Thank you all for working your schedules so that you could be here pre-holiday. I think we have a pretty good discussion opportunity here this evening. And Jen, I know we spent some time talking about what happened during our last meeting and how we go forward, and look forward to today's discussion and see where that drives us. I think we're beginning to shape this a little bit, and I think today's discussion will help even more. So, okay.
That is great. Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you all for being here with us this afternoon, like you said. Mayor, is there anyone in the room with you?
Khalil is here with me,
Khalil.
and of
okay.
course Janelle. She's our IT extraordinaire here, as always. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Always reliable. Thank you. Okay, so then so Tom may join us by phone, and then Rodney. I don't see him here.
No, he's not here yet.
So, great. Anyway, so thank you all, as I said, for being here. We do have a busy agenda today, and I want to get right to the game plan. As you know, at the last meeting, we took your temperature on a long list of strategies that we have been discussing over the past few months, and we wanted you to explore those strategies for potential recommendations, kind of start the process of narrowing them down so that we could dig a little deeper. We started out with 14 options, one of which was none of the above, acknowledging that there may not, there might be a different direction that some of you want to go. We narrowed it down to 5 options based upon your votes, and that final tally was shared with everyone last week via email. There was a tie for 5th place, and so there are actually 6 strategies that we are focusing on today and in the coming weeks, and those 6 strategies are raising freeboard, increasing the open space in new subdivisions, reducing maximum lot coverage, requiring a real estate disclosure, creating a resiliency fund, and reevaluating landscape standards. And so those were the 6 out of the 14 that received the most votes from you all, and that we are going to start digging down into. And so today, what the plan is to have everyone put on their policy analyst hats and think a little bit more about these strategies in terms of how they compare to each other. In order to frame that comparison, the planning team recommends starting with a series of criteria. And these criteria may not be new to many of you, because as we were listening to you at the last meeting, we heard many of you stating how you evaluated the strategies and ultimately chose what you thought the committee, what you thought your focus should be. And so based on those discussions, we pulled together what we heard into a matrix that we think is a good framework for discussion. And so I'm going to share that matrix with you now. Make sure I have screen sharing. Yep, great. Thank you, Janelle. Okay, can everybody see that? Yep, great. Okay, so we're starting out with, so the down the side row is what we're showing the strategies that came up with our top 6 that we're focusing on. There's a row with the existing regulations, a row with the best practice examples that we have been discussing, and then we input some of the criteria again that we heard from you, and then we've added a couple as well. Let me just run through them real quick, and then we can talk about some questions that you might have on them and how we're going to proceed through the discussion for today. The first one, of course, is geographic area of input, and so where within the city would implementing this strategy apply? For some of the strategies, it's intended to be a citywide application. For other strategies, it may just be within the 100-year floodplain, or areas with, extensions of that 100-year floodplain if it has to do with sea level rise over a certain time period. Excuse me. The second question is quite broad. It's basically make sure that everybody has an understanding of what is the impact, right? So different strategies have different impacts. Some of them are going to actually be working to reduce the risk, reduce the damage from flooding and sea level rise. Other impacts may be more in regards to infiltrating stormwater, reducing runoff off of individual properties, or increasing natural protections that the environment offers to flooding. And the impact can also be thought of in terms of providing information. And so once we understand the impact, then you can look a little bit more at how it's effective, and is it effective in a short term, a medium term, a long term. And so that question really gets into a very broad discussion, but we thought we'd start kind of on the highest level, and as we go through the next few meetings, we can dive in a little deeper to those specific ones. Costs and benefits, I think everybody's fairly familiar with that. The concept, every policy has, there's a cost to it, and there's also intended benefits. And so to whom are those costs, who bears those costs, and actually who gains those, the benefits is a big part of the discussion, and is very closely related to the next category that we have there, the next criterion, which is equity. And of course, again, that refers to how are the costs and benefits distributed? Is it equal? Is it fair across different populations within the city? Administrative feasibility is one that is does not naturally come to people's minds at the public level, but it refers to basically what is the city's effort to implement a particular strategy. And so what is it going to require in terms of staffing, specialized training, other types of resources, and is that a reasonable expectation when you're looking at kind of the trade-off, when you're looking at what you get for that specific policy. And then we added a potpourri, because of course we recognize and realize that we have not covered every possible criteria that you're going to look at, but we want to provide kind of that miscellaneous category to kind of be a catch-all. Obviously, we can talk about what some others might be, but we thought this was a good starting point. And, we also realize, and we hope to have you realize, through the discussions today, that the answers to these may require a bit more digging, right? So it may depend on what that actual strategy looks like. And so the Resiliency Fund is a good example, right? Until we know exactly how it's structured and how it's funded, it's difficult to answer those other questions. And so our time today might be better spent just talking about or hearing your thoughts on how that would look for the city of Lewis and how that can be customized to work best for you all. So let me stop my share for just a second and ask if there's any questions on kind of that framework that we're offering for at least the initial conversations today.
Jen, while we're taking a break, Tom Fanetta has sent me a text that he's on the phone.
Oh, fantastic. Great, welcome, Tom. Okay. And so the plan for today, we'll go back into this. So the idea is that we will spend about approximately 10 minutes on each of the strategies. And so we have 6 strategies, 10 minutes. That takes us about an hour of discussion. We obviously don't expect to cover everything and cover all those details, but we just want to hear from you, your thoughts in terms of evaluating and in terms of what the options are for each of these categories, or for each of the strategies. And so we'll spend 10 minutes on freeboard, 10 minutes on the next one, and go from there. So my job is to ensure that everyone contributes and has a chance to speak their piece, but also to keep us all on track, both topic-wise as well as within our time limits. So I'll be giving you a 5-minute alert when half of our time has passed. We have 5 minutes until we move on to the next one. And, we don't expect, again, to cover all of, the different areas, and what we don't cover will be the planning team is listening to your discussion and to your answers. And so we'll be kind of filling in the table in the background, but and we'll come back next month to kind of fill in some of the places that were missed and continue the conversation that way. So any questions on the plan? No? Great. Okay. So it is 4:13. I'm going to set a timer for 4:14 just to get us started. And go with that. And so we're going to start, the first 10 minutes is talking about raising freeboard. And so this is one that more than half of you chose as one of our potential strategies to focus on. And so what I'd like to hear from you all is kind of your thoughts in terms of what the options are within freeboard, increasing freeboard, and what you think the costs and the benefits of that are, what the pros and cons are as we move forward. And I see Jim just joined us as well. Hello, Jim. Thank you. So would anyone like to start with their thoughts on freeboard, in increasing freeboard? What are the costs? What is the impact? Where is it? Oh, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the first thing on freeboard is that I think we have to make it clear that whatever is decided applies to new construction, not to existing construction, just like the current 18 inches of freeboard applies to new construction. When you look at the projected sea level rise, if you have a little over 3 millimeters a year, over 50 years, looking at about 6 inches of sea level rise. Even if you use 5 millimeters, assuming my math's correct, you have 0.2 inches a year, which equals 10 inches. If you look at it over a 70-year period, you still only have 14, which is less than our current 18 inches of freeboard. So then I wonder, what is the case for raising the freeboard, particularly when you look at least the Delaware communities? None of them currently have a freeboard requirement that exceeds 18 inches, and some of them have a freeboard requirement of only 12 inches. My view is that people should be able to make a decision. They should be told when there should be an ordinance that requires them, when they apply for a permit, plus a real estate disclosure, of the risk if in fact the expected sea level rise or the expected occurrence of storms is more than what is anticipated, that this could be the consequences to with respect to their property.
Right. So, Joe, what you were bringing up is, kind of looking at, the projections for sea level rise and relating freeboard to that. And so that looks at, the options in terms of freeboard as a strategy is how much would we raise freeboard by, right, in order to relate that. And so I'm talking about, what is everyone?
One thing, also, do you have the figures? I don't have them at hand. I guess I could track them down. What was the increase in flooding as a result of Sandy in the 1962 storm? It's just something that I don't have the figures right here.
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head either, and I'm not sure it's something that we want to spend, at this point, we just want to talk about what, the details of increasing freeboard would look like. And I realize what you're saying, you're trying to relate it to sea level rise, but does anybody else have, thoughts on, where does freeboard, where would it apply, and whether to go with, right now we have 18 inches, and, the best practice was somewhere between 2 feet and 3 feet. Is there a feeling of how that would impact other areas? Or other ideas? Marta?
I guess, I didn't put it on there because I didn't think it was something our committee would be discussing, but I agree freeboard is important to raise, and if the best practices are 2 feet to 3 feet, I would hope we could at least go to 2 feet. sea level rise projections continue to show that they get worse each time a new report comes out. So just if we have a current rate of increase going on right now, I would guess by the next time we have another report from the IPPC, maybe in 3 years, it'll be even worse. And it's much more difficult to catch up if we don't do these things now. I just think we should do what we can right now to avoid having the worst case scenario where the only method of dealing with it would be relocation for everybody. So I would hope we could go at least with 2 feet.
Okay, how does everybody else feel about that? Drew?
Wanted to respond to Joe in part because I'm not sure where he gets his statistics. DENREC says there are 3 estimates for sea level rise. One is a half meter, one is 1 meter, and one is 1.5 meters, not 3 inches a year, or 3 inches every 6 years, or whatever standard Joe was saying. So I think, as Marta described, we should be at least on the low end of best practices for future development because it's only getting worse. And I think we need to be mindful of the fact that the Delaware Bay is very vulnerable to storms, and that we should do everything in our collective approach to this to protect future homeowners and current homeowners.
Fantastic. And we have about 3 minutes and 30 seconds left on freeboard before moving on to open space. So, and I see Jim and I see Frank. Frank, why don't you go ahead first?
I think we need to be very, very careful about raising freeboard without making an accommodation for increasing the overall building height. And I also think we really need to scrutinize the amount of freeboard that is required now, which is 18 inches versus anything that we would propose. You know, at some point, and I've said this before, at some point, if you make freeboard 8 feet, what have you really accomplished when the real problem is that you can't get to the flood-prone properties because the roads are flooded. So you have an infrastructure problem, which is, you know, completely different matter than freeboard. So, you know, those are a couple of things. Also, the freeboard requirement would only apply, I believe, in mapped flood zones of Lewis, which primarily is Lewis Beach, Pilot Point, Port Louis, some areas of Cape Shores, and then there are a couple of mapped areas that occur on Hornkill and Rodney, and maybe one other street along Pilot Town. So, you know, a good chunk of Lewis isn't affected by any change in freeboard, only the mapped areas.
It is a good point. We will have maps of the floodplain available as we get deeper into that. Okay, Jim, go ahead. We have about 2 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, quickly. I really enjoyed your chart in the beginning. Freeboard geographic area of impact. I agree with Frank. Just want everyone to understand that freeboard is only required in the floodplain areas, which is areas in the AE zone, A zone, AO zone, and the E zone, which is not a large area. Well, I mean, there are portions, obviously, but we can look at that later in the city of Lewis. Impact. There is an impact, obviously. The more you raise your residents, and as of now, not having an additional height being raised, there is a financial impact as far as the property value impact to that people need to be cognizant of. If a house on Lewis Beach is a house that's, does not meet the 18 inches of freeboard right now, if it unfortunately went through a fire and would have to get rebuilt and have to meet the 18 inches of freeboard, or if it's higher, maybe it's fine right now, but if it's higher but can't meet the height limit by building back the same, now all of a sudden you're maybe Chris can speak to this, you might be in a little bit of the weeds with your insurance company, because you can't rebuild the way that that it originally was. So,
Well, I think that's a separate issue, and I'm not going to speak for the city at the point, but I believe you're allowed to rebuild as you were originally there. And our timer is just about to go up, but I want to get Keena a chance to also speak before we move on to the next one.
Well, my point, I agree with what Frank and Jim have to say, and I think we need to look very closely at how that will affect the variety of houses that we have here on the beach or in other floodplains before making this decision. Case in point, Jim used the fire example. There was one, I have asked for more accurate information on this situation, but there was a homeowner here that wanted to put on a small addition. And then they had to raise it higher, the addition higher to meet the freeboard, and it was not a large addition at all. But then the city required apparently that they had to make the roof line all the same, and therefore the expense they bared was quite, it affected them quite a lot. And as a result, instead of keeping the older house, they ended up tearing the whole thing down. So where we're trying to protect some of the history of Lewis, and a lot of these homes were built by working class individuals, whether they've handed them down or they still are here. I think we really need to look at this closely, how it affects everybody that's in these, that will be affected.
Sure, great. And so there are trade-offs, absolutely. That is definitely part of the discussion. Okay, so our next topic.
Jen, before you go to that, Tom said he wanted to make
Yes.
Tom said he wanted to make a comment. I don't know if we can access him to make a comment or not. Sorry about that.
Sure, no, that's okay. I don't know, is he one of the...
Can you unmute him?
He needs to do it himself.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll send him a note. Let's go on then. If he wants to come back to it, we'll get it back, okay?
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, so our next topic is increasing open space in new subdivisions. And so, again, we talk about that being the larger lever. So what are the options in terms of that lever? The existing open space is 10%. And I believe there are discussions in the subdivision committee. Oh, there we go. Okay. Tom, we'll go back to you in just a second. But thank you. So we want to talk a little bit about increasing that open space and what you think the options are within that strategy. Anybody have any thoughts on increasing open space in new subdivisions? Is there a specific range or percentage, or we have? Yes, Frank.
Well, two things that come to mind immediately is new subdivisions within the city limits. At this point, are they even going to be in a flood zone? And let's not, forget about the one that's on New Road. I forget the name of that one, and then the other one off of Monroe. It's hard for me to visualize where a new subdivision would be within city limits that would be in a flood zone, i.e. affected by sea level rise. And two, if we talk about sea level rise, think about a football field that's wide open and nothing but grass, that's situated below flood or in a flood zone, and think about a city block populated with buildings that are abutting one another in the same flood zone. With the case of sea level rise, they're both going to flood equally, and you're not doing anything to mitigate or make that area resilient, which is what our goal here is. So I struggle to think how this, any increase in open space affects resiliency against sea level rise.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? What the details are? I mean, obviously, open space Yep, go ahead, Marta.
No, I don't think it's just sea level rise. I mean, it is sea level rise, but as it affects flooding, that affects a lot of other areas that are not necessarily right now in the floodplain. In the end, the more open space we can preserve, it has benefits. We have less impervious pavement around to spread out the water along other properties like it's happening now. And we have more opportunity to have trees that will, absorb carbon. There's just open space. If you look around the city right now, a lot of it, because of grandfather provisions, a lot of lots are way over the lot coverage. And so to keep some of that open space would be a beneficial thing for new developments. I mean, we're not affecting anybody who has a house right now. Yes, the landowner who wants to make all the money he wants out of, he or she wants out of the lot, but we also have to protect the livelihood and of others from flooding.
This is Tom Panetta.
Yes, Tom, go ahead.
Okay, so two things. I'm going to go back to the freeboard and also on this topic. You have to remember, resiliency is not just about sea level rise. We should be looking at climate change. And as I've expressed before, and I apologize for being a broken record, the NOAA and FEMA all have data that show that rainfall events are also getting much more severe. And the 100, 10-year, and 1-year events are eventually going to become the 10-year, the 1-year, and the regular events. So we shouldn't just be limiting ourselves to discussing sea level rise. Now back to the topic of freeboard. Freeboard has existed before climate change was ever discussed. It is uncertainty. So just because the 18-inch freeboard encompasses sea level rise doesn't mean that it shouldn't be additive to it. So my position on freeboard is the 18 inches of freeboard needs to move in parallel with the changes in sea level rise and climate change forecasting. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, Kina, and then I want to see if we can get to some other people. We have about almost to our halfway point. Go ahead, Kina.
I really had a couple questions, and Marta hit on one. I wanted to really have a better understanding of the benefit to the open space as it relates to what we're talking about, and what kind of cost impacts there might be for that kind of thing.
Sure, absolutely, and that's part of what, as we dive deeper into these, we can talk about. I mean, obviously, those things, the benefits and the costs both will depend on what that percentage of open space will be increased to, which is one of the kind of menu of items that we would have to look at as we look at that strategy. Is it 15% or knocked up to 20% or something like that? And then there's, what goes with that is how do you balance, as you get into that strategy in terms of the subdivision, how do you balance how many houses are allowed on the remainder of that property? And so all of those are the types of details that go into writing that type of ordinance.
Do I understand correctly that currently there is no requirements regarding open space?
That is incorrect, actually. Right now, there's standard open space, or standard subdivision, requires 10% open space, and then you have what's known as a cluster subdivision, and that is just what it sounds like. The houses are on smaller lots on a smaller portion of the overall tract, and so in those you're required a range, I believe it's 30 to 40% or 20 to 30% minimum open space. And so you're welcome. Okay. Is anybody we haven't heard from yet have any thoughts on either the open space and new subdivisions or the I don't want to go back to freeboard, sorry, but, on that topic, questions or thoughts?
So just maybe Janelle or Drew can chime in, but my recollection is that the 10% open space includes things like stormwater management ponds, paved areas for recreation. It is not all impervious, or pervious, excuse me. Just a clarification for the group.
Sure, and those are great details, and that would not be actually unusual that there's a certain amount of impervious permitted because you're allowing other or restrained areas, your floodplains and your not steep slopes, but or wetlands are being allowed in that type of area. If George and Janelle want to clarify that now, we can go ahead. But if not, we'll put that on our list of information to bring back to you in more detail.
That's correct.
Well, but specifically, swimming pools, the patios around swimming pools is all considered open space. It certainly is not pervious.
Point taken. Correct. Okay. Anyone else have thoughts about the increasing open space? No? Martin?
I guess nobody's mentioned the percentage. I would go with 25% open space. We need to talk about how much of it has to be, what uses can be put on that open space as well. And as Tom said, I think, if it's patios and things like that, that's not providing the pervious pavement benefits. So we should talk about that too, whether that has to apply that way or not.
Right. And I think, Frank, I think you were the one who mentioned, within the city limits, no one's brought up the idea of the annexation areas. And, I know that's a whole other topic going on within the city, but just so we do have that on the radar of it being, potentially applicable there. Was a thought too. Okay. All right, well, there's less than a minute left on that topic. Unless anyone has something else, we can move on to the next one, which is, okay, so the next strategy is the maximum lot coverage, okay? And the ideas of decreasing maximum lot coverage and what might be, again, the options. How could this look in, across from the city? Not necessarily the pros and cons, but how could it look in different, across the city? I know somebody has reactions to this one. Oh, and Joe, go ahead. I'll let you start.
I just don't know what the purpose of this is, really. At least insofar as Lewis Beach is concerned. What is the impact of 65% versus 45%? Does anybody measure that? Where do we get this number of 45% from? I don't think it's going to reduce flooding any, because we have the flooding from now. I just don't know what the purpose of reducing the lot coverage.
Sure. And so that's one of the things that the planning team can bring. Look at the academic research of what some of the impacts of that have been, or we can certainly discuss that. We looked at, of course, other, as you know, the best practices, other places, and what they have done or are currently doing, and the fact that Lewis is one of the highest, if not the highest, surrounding. But are there, Phil?
Yeah, just in response to Joe's question, am I doubling up?
No,
I
you're fine.
have two monitors here, and I'm hearing the echo on myself as I'm taking notes.
No, we can't, we hear you just fine.
Okay, good. In response to Joe's question, the academic literature does say that reducing lot coverage does reduce runoff and hence reduce the severity of flood events. So, and I'm happy to share that paper with the committee here.
Great, thank you. Kina and then Frank.
Sorry, I was having trouble getting my microphone unmuted there. I do agree with Joe, and I also think we need to consider the soil that, the area sits on. And see what kind of drainage it is. So I'll also be interested in seeing what those academic figures are. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, and so you're talking about the applicability. Or maybe it's not a citywide, but has something that's a little more fine-grained, but like I like the pervious and impervious. But Frank, go ahead.
Well, again, I think we just have to be really careful when we look at, and let's just pick some numbers and say for fun that we want to reduce lot coverage on Lewis Beach, for example, down to 20%. That, with the small lots that you see on Lewis Beach, that's going to be way out of line with what is currently developed. So then if you have a neighbor that has a lot that is undeveloped, and there are a couple there on the beach, but not many, and he is now subject to a 20% coverage restriction, whereas the neighbor next door has, what is it now, 50 or 65%, something like that. What you've done is instantly created a huge disparity in property values, and how is that going to be addressed? You've got existing houses that are, higher lot coverage than what is going to be allowed either on an empty lot or a lot that's demoed, and it's essentially, in my mind, a taking with no compensation. So I think we got to really, really explore that before you start, cinching down these lot coverage requirements. And I think we also need to think about, too, a 20% lot coverage, and I'm just kind of picking these numbers out. A 20% lot coverage is very appropriate if you have a larger lot. If you have a half-acre lot or an acre lot, to restrict it to 20%, is very appropriate, and you see that in some areas. But 20%, and again, I'm just picking these numbers, 20% on a 5,000 square foot lot is unduly restrictive, in my opinion, and especially if you do it without compensation.
Right. Well, and I would think that most people on the call would probably agree that 20% on a 5,000 square foot lot is a bit extreme. And
that's what has been proposed in the recent past.
Okay. Well, 20% reduction from the existing 65 is a little.
Can I clarify that?
20%.
Yes, thank you, Emery.
The 20% was based on the source water protection ordinance that was adopted in 2008. That is not anything that's being proposed at this point. As a matter of fact, we have a pending ordinance that would remove that requirement from existing lots. There's, as far as I'm aware, there's no discussion of 20% at this point in time.
Thank you, Emery.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement. 20% is not a realistic number, not what we're talking about as part of this, but some reduction from the existing 65%. And so we can talk about that range. What might that reduction look like?
The concept is the same. Any reduction the concept applies. I'm just using the extreme as an example so that it's easily understood.
Fair enough. Okay, Jim and then Marta, and then Chris.
And this is Tom.
Okay, go ahead, Tom, sorry.
No, go ahead with the others. Or just quickly, we all have to remember what Charlie O'Donnell gave to the committee several meetings ago. Lewis Beach is a little bit of a different animal. We have limited stormwater facilities out there, and we have limited capabilities to put stormwater facilities in because of the low-lying nature, and thereby preserving open space is part of flood control, not from sea level rise, but from climate change and precipitation. And second, I just want to point out that Lewis Beach isn't the only place that has 5,000 square foot lots. There are the R4 zone on the mainland side also has that same low lot size. So the lot sizes are comparable. But mainly I wanted to talk about the stormwater management and the difficulties of dealing with that on the beach side.
Great, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, I appreciate that. And so we are at about a little under 3 minutes, and I saw Jim's hand, I saw Marta's hand, and I saw Chris's hand. So Jim, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, real quick, just everybody on the panel, maybe take a look at your own lot coverage that you currently have before we start throwing out numbers, and think about that. Number two, I'm not sure exactly how effective it's going to be because Frank and I, we deal a lot with buildings that are, on existing lots that are proposed to be torn down and rebuilt. However, maybe that building is over the setback, so therefore there's ways to renovate that particular building to keep those setbacks. So therefore, you're going to start, if you don't have many empty lots in Lewis, you're going to start having those renovations occurring and not necessarily being new rebuilds in order to maintain their current lot coverage that they have presently. So I'm not sure, you got to think about the effectiveness of what you're actually proposing.
Right, so you're talking about kind of unintended consequences.
Yeah, exactly. And then third thing, just a general question on all of these, with the exception of maybe the second one we talked about. Are we just talking about residential? Because freeboard applies to commercial lot coverage. I'm sure it's commercial. Because all the discussion so far has just been about residential.
That's a good point, and that's something the committee has discussed. Obviously right now it does apply across the board to both residential and commercial. And so that would be one of the options within that strategy discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Marta, Chris, and then Drew.
I think this is one of the more important strategies that we can pursue. It just makes sense that if you have a lot of pervious, a little bit more pervious area, you'll be able to absorb more of the water coming in. And I understand the equity issue, but those buildings that are there already are there, and we still need to try to think about the future and what we can do to be resilient.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, Chris?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I have a cold, so I cough, excuse me, but as I look across the board at all the other towns around us, anywhere from 35 up to 40%, 45%. And we're on the higher end, 50% for our house, 65% total, I guess, pervious or impervious coverage. And I'm not sure that anybody really has a super good concept of what that really means. Like, when your house is covering 50% of your lot, is that appropriate? When you put a house in the middle of a lot and you look at a survey, it looks like that house is taking up a whole lot of that lot. It really does. Some of the bigger new builds that have gone on, you look at them and it's like, how can that be 50% of the lot? But it really, I don't really know if we have enough information here. I know we don't, and that'll be part of what we're doing, but I'd like to get some data. If we're going to look at like Lewis Beach, for instance, and say we're going to mess around with this number, what's the average coverage that we have now? I'd like to know that. I think, just throwing around this number is 50%. Are we close to that now on average, or are we way below that? So this is really going to have a big impact. Changing that number from 50% to 55%, to me, that just doesn't sound like it's going to accomplish a whole lot.
Okay, that's a great request. Thank you. It's something we can work on. Drew.
Well, I just wanted to respond to Frank. The thing that was under consideration by the Planning Commission was 50% across the city, not just on the beach, but across the city. And that was in response to the analysis that was forthcoming from the previous water workshops on on all three fronts, as Tom Panetta has said: groundwater, stormwater, and sea level rise. It wasn't just because of the beach. It wasn't just because of sea level rise. It was those areas that have some water impact from storms or from groundwater in addition to sea level that we took into consideration. The point, though, was the standard we felt should be applied across the city, not just on the beach or in limited areas, for reasons that have been stated several times now. The current standard of 65% has had less than uniform enforcement, to say the least, as some of the other code provisions related to lot coverage. So we thought there needed to be a uniformity that was very clear, there was a bright line, and that it applied to everybody. That's it.
Thank you, Drew. And with that, our time for that one is up, and we're going to move on to the next strategy, which was the idea of implementing a real estate disclosure. And so, again, this one's one of the less defined ones, and talk about what that real estate disclosure could do and could address. We can have a little thought about that. And I'll start my timer. Anybody want to start with some thoughts on the real estate disclosure? Should it deal with, is it just flooding? Is it sea level rise? And if it's sea level rise, what level of sea level rise, perhaps? Joe?
Well, I think the disclosure should deal with sea level rise. It should deal with the flood events, the frequency, the past experience, so people can make an intelligent decision what they want to do with their property. Consistent with the comments of Frank, there is a consideration of taking people's property and paying for it. And I just wanted to mention, in that respect, Scott threw out some numbers, but I don't know where they came from. But anyway, if he takes a look at the NOAA projected increase in inches each year, it's something like 3 millimeters equals 0.12 inches. These are not numbers I'm making up. You can go look at NOAA, you can look at NASA. So I think we need to bear in mind all the facts, but there are wide ranges, and people should be aware of those and make an intelligent decision. But also, I think if they do increase their freeboard, there should be some point where they be able to elevate their homes, maybe not fully to that extent, but at least partially.
Anyone else have any reactions to that or a thought to that? I know, Candace, you've been a little quiet today. I don't know if this is a particular topic of interest, but if you have any thoughts.
I'm in favor of disclosing when situations arise where a person contemplating buying a piece of property should know where their property is situated and what kind of history it has had with regard to flooding. I endorse that.
Okay, great. And I know we also haven't heard from Khalil, and because he's in the room, I don't see.
Yeah, he's here.
Hi, Jen. I'm kind of reluctant to opine on anything, frankly, because I may have to vote on some of these recommendations that come up, and I certainly don't want anyone to construe anything I say as bias, so to speak. I will say this. From what I'm hearing, it appears that this is shaping up to me as a simple cost-benefit issue regarding resiliency, and that I believe everyone here wants to do everything to protect our community, but they also want it factored in that there is a cost, particularly to homeowners and property owners, and that needs to be incorporated in any calculus that we move forward with. So I'll simply leave it at that, but that's how the debate and the conversation seems to me where it's heading. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's, that simply we have a sharp group of people around here with diverse backgrounds and expertises who want to, protect our community, but we also want to make sure we do it in a responsible way that doesn't harm individuals and their assets. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Khalil. Okay, I see Jim and I see Frank. And I see Marta. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Sure, real quick, the real estate disclosure, I think it's a great idea. I think it's, any information is fantastic. I do think that information should include some of the sea level rise projection charts that you had presented earlier. And mainly because people need to know in some of those properties, not only is it the property that is projected to have sea level rise, but also the access to the property. Because the road, the roads to a lot of these properties are not really accessible during some of these events. And they need to understand that that's going to be the case. And so maybe that particular chart or those particular maps would make that a little more clear for them to see not only just their property projection, but the surrounding area and access to the property.
Great suggestion, thank you. Okay, Frank?
Yeah, just very briefly, education's great, costs very little, benefits a whole bunch. Love it.
Short and sweet. Okay, and Marta?
I don't think that's a bad idea at all to have disclosure requirements. I would want to know if there's been a flood in the house or be able to know if there's access issues. I don't know if this is a really good way to address the resiliency of the community. The house is there, whether people buy it or not, because of the disclosures, but still not going to get at how do we protect our community. But I'm in favor of doing it.
Sure, and in favor of showing both flooding and sea level rise at certain levels. Okay. Anyone who not commented on the real estate disclosure want to comment on the real estate disclosure? Chris? Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'll be brief. This one just seems kind of easy. It's not going to cost a lot. I don't think it's going to cause a lot of angst in the community. You just can't argue with putting the information out there, providing links to the maps on the disclosure. And maybe this disclosure sort of, in the end, provides, we were talking about freeboard, maybe if we end up not doing anything with freeboard, the disclosure somehow takes care of that, where the disclosure is saying, look, this might be something you want to think about or some sort of recommendation about freeboard, but not necessarily make the change.
Good detail. Kina?
I think we need to consider adding or encouraging education about it long before they get to the settlement table and read the disclosure, because by that time they might be so committed it'd be hard for them to change their mind. So if there's a way that we can get that information out sooner, and then the signature of that, comes later. Maybe it's when a real estate agent begins working with an individual that's we have some kind of incentive or encouragement that they educate them at that point as opposed to at the settlement table.
So there's a timing in relation to the efficacy. Absolutely. How does everybody else feel about that idea? I see a couple of thumbs up. I see some heads nodding. Okay. Tom, I don't know if I gave you a chance to respond to this one, if you're there.
No comment.
No comment. Okay. All right. Well, that one word, we have just about a minute left on real estate disclosure. So it sounds like if there's no closing comments on that one, we can move to the next strategy, which is the Resiliency Fund. Okay. So again, this is kind of new territory. There isn't something existing in Lewis, and we have a couple of examples nearby from Bethany Beach and from Sussex County, but they're not necessarily how it would have to look in Lewis. And so, are there thoughts on, what you like or dislike about the way that Bethany Beach or Sussex County likes, or is there something that you think a way that you would envision it working? Jim Baker.
All right. I really like this one because I'm going to go back to, and excuse me, Marta, for bringing up your name, what you mentioned on number 3, maximum lot coverage. Because I wrote it down because you said it was the most important strategy of this that you felt for sea level rise. And that's great. So is there another way of accomplishing some of these goals and help mitigate some of the flooding issues that don't deal with restrictive ordinances? Is there another way of achieving this? This type of fund, I feel, would have an effect on them. So if you're talking about Lewis Beach, say, in a 3-block area that has excessive flooding, when properties are up for sale, does the city have an opportunity to purchase those properties? Does the city have an opportunity to purchase those properties and make it a stormwater management park? Does it have an opportunity to purchase that property and have it 100% open? These funds gives the city that ability to do things like that. So I think this resiliency fund is something that is probably the most important on the list because it doesn't, it helps the city, it helps those residences, it helps the access to those residences by having this amount of funding to help to do some of these things, to buy properties that they feel are in sensitive areas. So I think having that fund would be extremely beneficial to give them those options.
So Jim, you're talking about using the funds for buyouts, for infrastructure improvements, any other things? You said raising the road space possibly? Was that one of, I'm trying to make sure I get them all.
Yeah, and maybe Amrique, or maybe the city, there's a lot of devil in the details, right? So there's, but the general framework would be very similar to like, open land trust fund or something similar where they have the opportunity to to make these decisions in order to help protect the properties and help protect the infrastructure that is associated with those properties. It doesn't. I don't see a downside in that. It doesn't negatively affect anybody's property values. In fact, it might actually increase their property values if you're now all of a sudden next to a park, or a city-owned property. So I think it just gives them the option to be able to use those funds, and again, there's obviously a lot of work to be done in that, but it gives them the option to use those funds to accomplish these items that we've been talking about in a different manner. Because the whole idea that we're here is for resiliency and mitigation of sea level rise and flooding. So there's other ways of doing these things. There's other ways of creating more open space, and not just by doing maximum lot coverage. Because like I said before, I feel like there's little ways around that, and builders and residents of those properties will find those ways around it, and it won't be an effective method. So let's make something effective, and having these funds to be able to do effective methods to help mitigate some of these items, I think it's always a good thing.
Thank you. So who has some thoughts and reactions to that? Marta.
I'm in favor of a resilience fund. I don't know, I think it would have to be, we'd have to have quite a few guidelines on where it goes and how to prioritize different projects, because I don't know how much our real estate taxes or however we could provide the city with funds. I mean, we had the Boone Church property, and we had our city, the state, and I think the county trying to contribute, buying the land, and it didn't happen in the end because the developer offered more. But I still think though the maximum lot coverage could go in conjunction with all that. We should not be the highest percentage of coverage. That's all.
Well, fair enough. And I don't think, and just to clarify, I don't think any of these are mutually exclusive, right? I mean, if in the end we come up with a menu that mixes and matches some of these, I don't think that that's a problem, right? I mean, I think that it's just a matter of what you all, the balance that you all see. So, but sticking with the resiliency fund, what are some other thoughts on either where funds might come from or what the funds might be used to do that would help Lewis, or reactions to what we've heard? Anyone?
Well,
Tom?
This is Tom. Yeah, just to jump onto what Marta was starting off there, I don't have anything in principle against it. I find it difficult to understand where the funds would come from of any significant amount to do the type of things that were talked about. I mean, buying properties is millions and millions of dollars. Raising roads is millions and millions of dollars. And it would require raising taxes significantly in order to do that. And frankly, there's probably an equity issue because it would be cross-subsidizing from areas that are more at risk from those less at risk. So I'm once again not opposed to a resiliency fund, but it needs to be focused, defined, and the numbers of what's going to be spent and what's going to be the revenues need to be balanced. That's it. Thank you.
Great comment. Thank you. Okay. Before I go back to Jim, do Candace or Joe or Frank have anything to add?
I support a resiliency fund, and I understand the challenges associated with getting the kind of funds that we're speaking about, because to Tom's point, we're looking at millions and millions of dollars, and our tax base is unlike big cities where there's a continuous tax base that's not dependent on tourism and other things. So it's a different paradigm to consider in terms of how you put aside that level of funding for projects that are certainly deserving in the event of a major storm where road repairs are required and things of that nature. But the challenge is pretty big.
Great. Okay, Frank, go ahead.
I think the concept is sound and it's certainly worthy of a lot more exploration, more than the 10 minutes we're going to give here this evening, for sure.
For sure. This is just a starting point. Thank you. Anyone else?
Renewals of what we collect goes to.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. So, anything that we've talked about before, freeboard, lot coverage, those are, don't be mistaken, those are not things that will all of a sudden, if you implement more restrictive ordinances, that you're going to see an effect immediately. So same thing, think about that on the resiliency fund. You have to start somewhere. And it's going to take time to build up that fund to actually make it effective and make it meaningful. But so are these other items that we're talking about. They are very long term. I mean, maybe the city can help us out. Like how many actual building permits were applied for that would meet a more restrictive, like in the past year or 2 years, or average on 5 years, that actually would meet the, like, if you had to do a more restrictive freeboard requirement, how many actually would be affected? I don't know that answer. I don't know how many building permits were applied for that were new construction or substantially improved construction in the floodplain. So you have to, as Mr. Saliba said, you have to look at the cost-benefit analysis and see, okay, yes, you have these ordinances or you have these items, but are they really effective? Like, what does that mean? Definitely a long-term thing. So think of the resiliency fund as that. Certainly a long-term fund that will take time to build up. And I don't know where the money comes from. That's Mr. Saliba's job. So anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Jen, can I just respond a minute?
Yes, please.
I think we don't know I don't think Anne Marie knows either the number of building permits. We couldn't answer that question today. We could certainly do some research on it. But one of the things that could happen with the resiliency fund, we could, depending on how it was structured, we could use it to match other monies that might come in. So, yes, it would take a long time to build up a resiliency fund, but it could, if it's structured in the way that you could use it to match monies that were becoming available either at a federal or a state level, or maybe even a county level, that could, or from an independent donor, it might be another way to use it.
Great points. Phil.
That is how FEMA has a buyout program, and it requires a 50% match.
Right.
And any buyout must be turned into open space.
Right.
That is a requirement of participation with that program, that the land cannot be redeveloped.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, our time is up, and the last but not least, of course, strategy is the idea of revising the landscape standards. And again, as we discussed at the last meeting, there is review being done of the landscape standards contained in the subdivision ordinance by another committee. They're looking at tree protection, looking at tree replacement, those types of things. There are, however, that only applies to new subdivision applications, right? So the idea is to look at the potential for landscaping regulations potentially in the zoning or, in other ways. So I'm kind of sad that Rodney, our resident landscape architect, is not with us today, because I'm sure he would have had a lot to provide input on this one. But If anybody else has any thoughts on how this, what would work, what could it look like, and what are possibly some specific, ideas that could be incorporated into it. We did. Anyway, we talked about adding salt-tolerant plants, again, kind of the tree replacement ideas. There are some best practices in other places. Of course, as we all know, native species, right now the city encourages the majority use of native species, but that language could be made a little stronger and could be, again, incorporated into zoning. But there may be some other ideas that you all have or think in a specific area. Joe. You're muted, Joe. Sorry. Thank you.
The most important aspects of landscaping are trees. I think the city, I understand, already has programs to increase the number of trees. I think also in the beach area, we should encourage more trees. They have so many beneficial effects: removing carbon dioxide, preventing flooding, improving air quality, and on, habitat. And so whatever we may come up with, I think a key part of it are trees. In fact, when ACOM did their study in 2019 for the coastal communities, they had about 10 practices which would reduce flooding, and they pointed out that trees were exponentially better than any other of the proposed practices that should be implemented on lots. So whatever we can do to encourage the more trees, I think that will be extremely beneficial.
Kina and Marta.
Earlier, I had mentioned about, I'm in support of this. I think it's a great idea, but I do have concerns on how this would be done, how would you limit what other things that could be grown there, and therefore I have a little apprehension as to how this might be done. I see more encouragement as opposed to penalizing people, but I do think there's some things that we can learn to put forth that could make a difference. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Marta, go ahead.
I guess I was going to say something similar to Kina, but on the other side of things, if you leave it as just encouraging, we're not changing anything. People will put trees on if they want, and they won't if they don't want to. Maybe some of the open space that we might require could be required to include new trees because they help absorb the flooding, the water. It's a good idea. I'd like to see it actually implemented, though.
Sure. Jim, go ahead.
Sure. Would this also include any type of rain gardens or even opportunity for impervious driveways or surfaces like that? And I know the city's working on maybe some of that language, and correct me if I'm wrong as far as the impervious surfaces, but does that also coincide with landscape?
Typically, that would not be something addressed in a landscaping ordinance. And since we did have the permeable pavement listed as a separate strategy that did not make the top 5, I don't see that as being incorporated into this. But there are other, there may be ways of addressing it from other sides. Anyone else?
Is rain gardens though included?
Oh, sure. So rain gardens. I mean, obviously that's a huge landscape. There's a huge landscape component to that. Is a stormwater BMP, and could certainly be looked at from both sides. we can explore that. I mean, that's part of what this committee is, part of what these strategies are for, sure. Obviously, the landscaping for a rain garden are pretty specific. I'm not sure but we could have them, sure, right? Because I don't, and Janelle can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if the city actually has landscaping standards for rain gardens at this point or anything that addresses that.
We do not.
We do not, so there's a great inclusion. Martin?
If anyone would like to see some, I know a couple of great examples, Canal Front Park, and then the University of Delaware has one to look at too.
Thank you for that. Yes. Anyone else on that thought? Keenan?
Hi again. I do think there are some ways of encouraging people, Marta, without necessarily requiring it. Different programs can be put together as incentives, whether it's facilitating purchase of certain trees. I'm sorry, I'm not articulating. I'm trying to better describe it, but there are programs that do encourage the use of certain things, and I'd be happy to do some research on that for another time.
And I don't know, a lot of experience working in Pennsylvania, not as much in Delaware as of yet, but in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of towns that actually have a tree fund. So if someone can't replace a tree, or the number of trees that they're required to place on a particular lot, they can actually, again, contribute funds to a city designated tree fund that they can then use to plant trees in an open space or on the beach, or kind of designated places where they think trees are needed. So that might be something to consider.
It could be done. We have a memorial tree program where people can dedicate a tree in memory of or in honor of someone. That's been pretty successful, and we are already a tree city for over 17 years. But I think focusing more on trees, particularly, is a good idea.
Great. Okay. And so with that, we have finished our whirlwind tour of lightning rounds of our strategies, and we are about 5:21. I know we do have some people in the audience, but like I said earlier, so the idea of this was just to kind of get you talking about each of the strategies. Phil, as you mentioned, has been taking a lot of notes and kind of looking at the table, and so we'll come back at our next meeting in the beginning of December, and we'll pull the date up real quick. So we'll bring up that meeting, which is December 14th, and kind of maybe pinpoint some of the areas that we've missed, or focus in a little bit more on a particular strategies, because as Frank said, we certainly need to dive a lot deeper into each of these particular ones in order for everyone to really understand. But it has helped us on the planning team to hear, what information it is that you think you need to have those discussions and to kind of start this comparative process. It's 5:22. I don't know if there's any. I can turn it over to public comment unless anyone on the committee has any closing thoughts or comments or questions. Marta.
I have a quick question. Maybe people on the planning team could find out some information about the neighboring jurisdictions and how their lot coverage requirements have worked in terms of, has it been considered a takings issue if they've done it after fact, and that kind of thing.
Sure. We certainly have options in terms of talking a little bit more about the takings issue if that is a concern of the committee. So,
well, yeah, it seemed to be mentioned that, I think it was in terms of lot coverage, but maybe it was something else.
Mm-hmm. Good idea. Okay, got a second on that one. Anyone else on the committee before?
Joe has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Joe, go ahead.
I'm just wondering whether, for example, on sea level rise, I know Tom Panetta has a position, and it'd be useful and I have a certain position myself, and I think others probably share that, whether we could put together some facts with citations for our position and hear what the other side is so that we can try to move that issue along. That's a key issue. And it's kind of hard to do in this setting because we don't dig into the facts enough to be able to make a judgment. But I think if we could have a paper presenting one side and paper presenting the other side, we could hopefully come to a reasoned decision.
Well, we can take that under consideration. I don't know. We'll take that into consideration, Joe, and we'll talk about that as a planning team and let you know how we want to. That would be.
Yeah, this is Tom. This is Tom. I think the thought is correct. However, I would suggest that the planning team could pull together the data from NOAA, from FEMA, from the International Climate Change papers, and present that so that there was one common set, rather than it be, from either side.
Before she left for California, somewhere.
Okay.
I leave that up to you guys to decide.
Absolutely, and I will. We'll go back to our planning team and see what we come up with. Okay. Are there any? Oh, did I just say? Oh, Jim.
And included in that is there a way to actually get that permitting information on the number of new construction / substantially improved construction lots over some given time, so that we have an idea, on average, what are we looking at?
We could certainly ask the building officials to attempt to come up with that information for us.
The number of new construction permits is very easy.
Right.
Figuring out, just thinking about how the data are recorded, I think coming up with substantial improvement is going to be hard because we have renovation permits, addition permits, but without going into each permit to figure out the cost of the renovation versus the value of the structure, it's very difficult to figure out.
Wouldn't they already need to know that now, though, in order to meet the current FEMA freeboard requirements you have?
They would know that in terms of reviewing individual permits, but doing like a look back where you compile data, it's not going to be, it's not like there's a field in any database we have, so we'd have to pull all of the renovation permits for whatever the period of time is and do the analysis to determine, so again, it's not that we can't do that, it's that it would be extremely time consuming. The new construction is very easy.
Right.
So, I guess my question would be, how much value would the substantial improvement be? Because it would be very labor intensive.
I think we'd have to figure out a threshold, whether it's 50,000 or 100,000, something like that.
The actual cost of the permitting wouldn't necessarily mean that it's a substantially improved lot.
It's probably the only way we could get it, though.
Well, it sounds like
it's a challenge. We'll try to work it out with the building officials.
What information can be provided in a reasonable fashion. So, but
a
it's a
reasonable
great request.
amount of
Thank
time.
you. I see Keena, and then we do have one hand raised from the public. So go ahead, Keena.
Well, my question is actually directed to Jim. The clarity of what information exactly that we want to get out of pulling that permit and renovation stuff. What exactly is it we're trying to determine, Jim?
So all of these items are great if you start a new city today, right? These items are difficult to incorporate into an existing town with residential lot coverages in different percentages, elevations of the first floor, at different elevations. So what I'd like to know is, on average, if you increase the freeboard requirement, on average, how many properties a year would that really affect? How effective is this? And that's going back to my point on the resiliency fund. Is there a more effective way of accomplishing these goals? And is this an effective method? And I would love to know information on lot coverage, but I think that's going to be extremely difficult to obtain. What the existing residential lot coverage of the existing residents in the city of Lewis is right now. Because I'm telling you, if somebody wants to rebuild a property and that existing residence is at 60% or 50%, they're going to find a way to keep it at 50 or 60%. So if you go down to 40%, you're not going to gain anything from it. It's going to be a net zero. You're not going to gain a single thing. They're going to figure out a way to do what they want to do with that particular lot through renovation tactics, right? So I'm just trying to think. In reality, well, let's think about this and come up with realistic ways to make an effective change.
Thank you. Okay. And with that, we are at 5:30. I don't want to cut anybody off, but at the same time, I want to respect everybody's time and, what it is. Right, Frank, if you had something real quick, we can do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Jim, I bet you if we just had the number of new constructions, it would be fairly indicative of what you're asking for. It wouldn't be spot on, but I would think it would be enough to give us a feel.
Right. I'll do it.
All right. We have one, I guess, again, participant in the online from the public. I don't know if we can actually, if he has permission to speak, Janelle, if we can put something in the Q&A.
I mean, it doesn't include the lot. Right?
Rick will.
Structure. Almost anything is going to be substantial.
That's what I said, you can put a dollar through.
Yeah.
Rick, we can see you. Can go ahead. You have a quick comment, and we're at 5:30, so of course we.
Existing over there probably more than $100,000. So, using.
Rick, are you?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, so, and I'll make it very quick. I'm remiss that I haven't participated or seen the last few meetings. I appreciate everybody up there who gives up their time to do this. And I realized a long time ago that there isn't a democracy without a courteous exchange of ideas. I just want to make sure that I am extremely transparent with my neighbors and whenever I do something and this town. And I hear a lot of stuff that's going on, and I'm not going to be controversial at all. That's not my intent is. But I have a property that a lot of you are talking about and maybe it doesn't need to be addressed, but it's the corner of East Savannah and Cape Henlopen, which is an extremely valuable property. And I'm not trying to pitch anything to you. What I'm telling you now, to be transparent, is that is in the process. We've been years and years working on this, and with a lot of expenditures, and we are now pursuing the development of that property. And I should also tell you, and I shouldn't really give too much information because it's more than that to be worked out and with engineering and lawyering and all that. But also, the property at Two Dips is in the process of going to be developed. And I hear exchanges up there about purchasing whatever. I can just tell you this, and I've said it a number of times, is I care about my neighbors more than anything. And I've offered numerous times to this city, if they want to work with me, I'd be more than happy to work on a resolution of this property, even in potentially open space, which was brought up, or other uses. But I'm just giving it, and it's not a forewarning of doom. This is going forward, and it's going to be in the pipeline almost. I'm going to stop it there. So if anybody wants to reach out to me and talk to me, I'd be more than happy to talk about what's going on. But I think it's with a lot of things you were talking about. I just got on in the last half hour. The property on the corner and two dips are very relevant to what you guys are talking about. And that's all I'm going to say. But I appreciate your time. If anybody wants to reach out to me, they're perfectly, I'm available anytime at my Blue Water House. People know how to get in touch with me. And if not, then we'll let the play out the way it's been played out, the way I have tried systematically to develop this property to the benefit of the town, the code, and the comp plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Okay. And with that, we're at 5:34, and I just want to wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving and a wonderful week, and we will see you back on December 14th. So thank you all for your input and your thoughtful discussion, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Jen.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. And to everyone else online. Thank you very much.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay.
All right, we'll go have dinner with your daughters.
So I think Rick must have jumped on when we were talking about the resiliency fund.
We're not.
Yeah. We're not off yet.